thirds of the way through a 3-volume history of the Third Reich, Tommy.
I've purchased it a long time ago.
Yes.
I started it. I just don't. I can't.
I'm almost done with the Third Reich in power.
It's excellent.
It is a little too on the nose, I have to say. The capitulation of all aspects of German society to what they thought was a temporal threat of fascist government. But anyway, we could have like a Nazi book club because I've been doing some deep reading. So
what else you got?
I still recommend Darkness Over Germany, which is a contemporaneous account by a British journalist of like how Germans were dealing with the onset of Nazi Germany. Then there's a book called A Town in the Third Reich that's similar vibes. It's like a reconstruction of how one town dealt with it.
Is it like The Town? The famous Boston movie?
I don't know if there's a role for Affleck. By the way, I should say, I mean, we're still waiting for the sequel to The Town.
They're doing a sequel to The Town?
No, they should.
Oh, okay.
I'm just saying. I want to know what happened to Affleck. Wasn't he going down to the Florida Keys or something at the end?
Oh, that's right. Spoiler.
Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, I don't really remember.
It's good.
Yeah, well, we're on a dark place here, as you can tell, listener.
Yes.
But that's okay.
I guess that's usually the humorous banter.
Yeah,
but I guess that wasn't that funny.
No, I thought it worked. It worked for me. Well, we got a lot to cover today. We're going to talk about the 3-year anniversary of the war in Ukraine and Trump's efforts to negotiate an end to the war while extorting as much as possible from the Ukrainian government. We're also going to talk about the results of the German election and what it all means. The newest addition to the team at the FBI. We're very excited to tell you more about that one. Then there was Trump's Friday night massacre at the Pentagon. Got an update on a bunch of immigration news because it's been hard to keep track of. We'll tell you about the bizarre collection of international leaders, in air quotes, at CPAC, everyone's favorite conservative political conference, and then the latest news from Gaza and the West Bank. And then you guys will hear my interview with Zeke Fox. He's an investigative reporter at Bloomberg Business Week. We go all into the crypto corruption stuff, Ben. You're going to enjoy this. Talk about the Trump coin, Javier Milei down in Argentina. There's another crypto, billionaire type who seems to be paying off the Trump family.
Oh,
just
good.
awash in corruption.
Yeah. I think this crypto beat is going to be an important sub-story. Not the A story, but it's right below it, I think. For the
it's where the money's going to move.
Yeah.
If you're a follow the money kind of guy or gal, crypto.
A little blockchain.
Get on the blockchain. Well, let's talk about Ukraine first, because Monday was the 3-year anniversary of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the full-scale Russian invasion. According to Ukrainian officials, Russia marked the occasion by firing their largest drone volley at Ukraine ever. But the biggest threat to Ukraine's future sovereignty now seems to be coming from Russia and the United States, which is a welcome addition for everyone. There were a bunch of European leaders who flew to Kyiv this week to offer more assistance and moral support. I think the UK offered $5 billion, Spain $1 billion. The EU is reportedly preparing about a $20 billion aid package. But obviously none of that is going to fill the gap that seems to be about to be left by the US. French President Emmanuel Macron traveled to D.C. to personally lobby Trump on all things Ukraine and pitch an idea for a post-war international peacekeeping force. Macron said during their joint press conference that a peace deal must, quote, not mean surrender of Ukraine, and that it must allow for Ukrainian sovereignty. Macron also pushed back on Trump's claim that all European aid to Ukraine was just a loan and that they were going to get paid back, whereas the U.S. is somehow getting screwed. Here's a clip of that back and forth in the Oval.
Will France support the U.S. being compensated?
I support the idea to have Ukraine first being compensated because they are the ones to have lose a lot of their fellow citizens and being destroyed by these attacks. Second, all of those who paid for could be compensated, but not by Ukraine, by Russia, because they were the one to aggress.
Again, just so you understand, Europe is loaning the money to Ukraine. They get their money back.
No, in fact, to be frank, we paid. We paid 60% of the total efforts, and it was through, like the US, loans, guarantee, grants, and we provided real money, to be clear.
Sounded fun.
Yeah. Sure, it was fun after the pool left.
Yeah, I just slapped them around. So, Ben, this meeting with Macron comes as the U.S. and Ukraine are reportedly close to signing an agreement regarding Ukraine's mineral reserves. Initially, Trump had seemingly demanded half of the profits from Ukraine exploiting its natural resources, up to maybe $500 billion, which is all the money we've given Ukraine for the war times 2, I believe. Now it sounds like it's some sort of joint development fund where the U.S. will also have access to this cash that will later be used for reconstruction. It's not clear exactly.
Yeah.
It's still, all of it is lacking, what the Ukrainians really want, which is a U.S. security guarantee. They're framing this as, well, more economic cooperation between the U.S. and Ukraine is a de facto, security guarantee because the Russians won't invade if we have skin in the game or something. It doesn't make any sense.
No.
Trump basically views this as payback for U.S. aid, but as Zelensky has noted, payback seems to include a 100% interest rate charge. In an interview with Russian state TV, Putin also suggested that Russia was ready to work with the U.S. on extracting rare earth minerals. And he suggested that the focus of his conversation with Trump and the talks in Saudi Arabia weren't really on ending the war. And then that he was open to this weird idea that Trump floated the other day about a joint 50% reduction in defense spending. I don't know, man. It's just baffling. Everything is confusing these days. Black is white, up is down.
Yes.
What did you make of Macron's visit and kind of where they're at on this mineral deal and these floats by Putin about like cooperation on mineral reserve exploitation? Like, what are we talking about at this point?
I think it's important, and we will try to do this every week, to kind of step back from all the strange back and forth day to day and just look at where we are, which is that all of the discussion right now is about what Ukraine needs to give up,
right?
And not Russia, the country that invaded Ukraine.
Give
and
up to us.
I know that's an obvious point, but,
I know.
But at no point in your winding, and this is through no fault of your own, it's because of Donald Trump, was there any discussion of what is Russia conceding?
Right.
Even any bits of the territory that they're currently occupying or trying to annex, or returning children that they've kidnapped, or paying any reparation, like that's all gone. And all we're talking about is what does Ukraine need to give to Russia in terms of territory, and what do they need to give to the U.S. in terms of these bizarre mineral rights, right? And this was manifest, by the way, in that UN General Assembly vote where the U.S. voted with Russia and North Korea and Belarus. Even Cuba and Iran abstained against Europe. And it's, to be clear, the first time since 1945 that the U.S. has voted with Russia and against Europe on any UN resolution. That's where we're at, right? On this mineral deal, it's truly baffling that we're spending this much time thinking and talking about something that is clearly manufactured bullshit. Trump needs to feel like he extracted something from the Ukrainians because of the support we've given them. Not only is that ghoulish, we talked about that last week, it's not real. This idea that if the U.S. has some mineral rights in Ukraine, that's tantamount to a security guarantee so Russia won't invade, that makes no sense. It just is a way for Trump to claim that he won something at the negotiating table from the Ukrainians. That, let's be clear, if Ukraine is swallowed up by Russia, that doesn't matter. If Ukraine is a kind of de facto squeezed, borderline failed state because Russia's kind of strangling them, it's not like it's going to be some minerals bonanza. It's not even clear, Trump hasn't even specified like why we need these minerals. It's just pure showmanship. And the fact that Putin went in on this, he went in on it because he would like nothing more than the U.S. to say, oh, sure, we will extract natural resources and minerals from the Russian-occupied territories of Ukraine. Because if the U.S. starts doing business in like Luhansk and Donetsk and Mariupol, that is not only recognizing the Russian occupation and annexation of those regions, that's kind of fully legitimizing, normalizing it. And, suddenly we're doing business in those places. So I think Macron was trying his best, and it was worth the effort to just try to like moderate the U.S.
He loves a diplomatic Hail Mary.
Yeah, he loves a diplomatic Hail Mary. He's trying to moderate like Trump's anti-Ukraine position, try to make a better deal on this minerals thing, try to probably just get past this hang up on minerals and return the conversation to security guarantees. I'm sure he was there to talk about the potential European force, the French and British and potentially other nations' force that would be in Ukraine on the back end, and just try to dampen his enthusiasm for butting up to Putin. And we don't really know how that went because Macron can't come out and say if he achieved something because he doesn't want to antagonize Trump and, wake up to a Truth Social tirade. But it seemed like it helped a little bit. I don't know. The terms of this mineral deal are better than the ones that were offered that Zelensky rejected a couple weeks ago. They were essentially just give us all these rights. Now it's at least a joint venture. So Macron does seem to have moved the goalpost a little bit on this.
Yeah, good work, Emmanuel. Yeah, I mean, just to go back to your point about like, don't forget the big picture. I mean, I was just thinking about the United Nations, which was pretty broken, ineffective, kind of a mess like 6 months ago. now that we've just decided to become part of the problem, I mean, I assume what will happen going forward is, Trump will tell Elise Stefanik, if she's confirmed, I don't think they've had a hearing for her yet because they still need her vote in the House, to just attack the institution, defend Israel everywhere. They're pulling out of the Human Rights Commission. I mean, talk about another, like we talked about last week, Trump turning away from NATO, which was set up in 1949 to deter Russian aggression against Europe. I suspect the next thing we'll see is the U.S. just kind of like fully pulling away from the UN or rendering it just useless, even at the Security Council level.
Yeah, it's already been paralyzed at the Security Council level for a while now.
Sorry, I meant at the General Assembly level.
But the General Assembly, I saw some people kind of laughing, rolling eyes about the General Assembly matters because it is like a barometer of how you're showing up in the world.
It's a global roll call.
Yeah, it's a global roll call. Where do you stand on these things? And it matters, it's one of these things where if it didn't matter, then people wouldn't care so much. Us kind of showing up in the world by saying we're on the Russian side. Russia wasn't the aggressor. I mean, that's essential. We voted against a resolution that specified Russia as the aggressor. That matters because that tells the rest of the world you better adjust to that reality. And I think what people need to realize is the outcome of that adjustment is not going to be seen tomorrow or 2 days from now, but 2 years from now, the world will have recalibrated to that, away from the United States. When Macron goes back to Europe, sure, he might have had to call Dear Donald and say nice things to Trump in front of his face, but I'm sure the Europeans are just getting together, and we'll talk about this, and like, how do we reorient away from the United States? And that's happening all over the world right now. The only other thing I say about the UN is, particularly with the destruction of USAID, who is left to show up in post-conflict zones, to show up with foreign assistance, to manage refugee flows? It's just the UN system and like philanthropy, basically, And so the UN really still matters. I mean, who's left to fight a pandemic? Who's dealing with bird flu now? If the US is kind of totally evacuating that space, the UN system itself matters. And it's not just what Elise Stefanik might be voting. It's that I'm sure they'll also be, choking off funds, as you said.
The funding effort.
And so then it's like, who's paying for these problems that you should care about, again, on a human level, but on a stability level? Like, if nobody is there to manage migration flows, guess what? There's going to be more migration. If nobody's there to stop pandemics, there's going to be more pandemics. So this dysfunction is going to be manifested over time.
Yeah. One place that reorientation away from the U.S. is happening in real time is Germany. So Germans went to the polls on Sunday. They had an election that saw the largest turnout in the country's history. I think it was about 82% of the population voted. It's just incredible. The results were not great, but far from the worst outcome. So in the not great category, the far-right AfD party doubled its support from the last election to about 20%. The AfD, as we've discussed, is seen by many Germans as the heir to the Nazi party. They're anti-Islam, anti-immigration, anti-EU, and pro-Russia. And prominent AfD members have minimized the Holocaust a number of times. There's also very extreme factions within the AfD that are seen as extremist threats by domestic intelligence. The left-leaning Social Democrats, or SPD, Olaf Scholz party, had their worst result since 1887, garnering only 16% of the vote.
Democrats feel better.
Yeah, Jesus Christ. Voters were not thrilled, to say the least, about the SPT's leadership over the past few years, and they made it known at the voting booth. It's hard out there for a neolib right now, Ben. So the traditional conservative CDU party got the largest share of the vote with 28.5%, but they fell short of their 30% goal. Big picture, CDU leader Friedrich Merz will almost certainly become the next chancellor. He's going to have to form a government coalition first. The good news for him is that he can almost certainly do so just by working with the SPD. That will give them enough votes in the Bundestag to form a government and have a majority. They will not have to include a third political party, which would have made things more complicated. Merz wants that process done by Easter, so it'll take several weeks at least. The most interesting, though, and surprising result of the night was probably the leftist Die Linke party, which a month ago seemed like they were not going to get the 5% share of the vote they needed to be represented in the Bundestag, but they ended up with nearly 9% of the vote. They had a huge surge of support at the end after this charismatic young woman leader named Heidi Reckenesch gave a speech denouncing Merz for putting forward this hardline immigration measure at the Bundestag that passed with a bunch of support from the AfD. Ben, just big picture, What are your thoughts on this result and kind of what it tells us?
First of all, I know you have become like a very enthusiastic observer of German politics. Did you watch the post-election tradition where they have all the leaders on television?
Yeah,
it's
weird,
the
right?
coolest
Yeah,
thing.
it's cool. Like it's so foreign to me as an American to see them all like up there talking.
So like the night of the election, like every leader of the party is like in a joint interview. It's totally wild. I love it.
You know, it's funny.
Yeah.
The reason I saw that, I kept thinking those were clips from a debate.
Yeah.
Because I was like, why the fuck are they all together?
It's crazy. I loved it. I didn't know that either. I was totally nerding out on it. On the election result itself, look, it's bad. The AfD did well. I mean, I saw some people on social media like being like, oh look, they failed. Nobody thought they were going to win.
Right.
But they got about 20%, which is about
a fifth of the population.
Yeah, it's a fifth of the population. That's bad, and it's about where they've been polling. The good news is the J.D. Vance, Elon Musk interventions did nothing to help them. So they were polling there before Elon started weighing in. So it is a bit of a rebuke to those guys because they were clearly trying to like pump up the AfD. That didn't happen. So that's one takeaway. I think the second thing is now Mertz's victory, this moves into the coalition formation, and we'll just have to see if that goes okay. They did, as we talked about last week, move so far right on immigration and some other things that might make it difficult, but I think in the end you would expect that the threat of the AfD somehow getting into the government will compel...
God, I hope.
I hope so, because, hopefully Mertz moves a little bit too to make that easier to happen. It's not like he has a massive mandate. He had under 30% of the vote. Yeah. The only other things that stand out to me, this left-wing surge is good, and notably, actually, the Libertarian Party that blew up the coalition didn't even make it to 5%. Mm-hmm. So, nice, well played there, guys.
Later.
Peace. I will say, like, she proves that maybe standing up on principle, like, attracts some people your way because they got the late-breaking vote and message to people. This is not even like a left center thing. It's just like speaking with some conviction appeals to people. And I'm glad she's going to clearly be a voice. And maybe she can be the oppositionist who can gather some intensity. So it's not just AfD. So what you don't want is that there's a big coalition government and all the energy of opposition goes to the right.
Right.
Maybe she can capture some of that on the left. That'd be good. The last thing we should talk about, though, is that Mertz, in that interview, said some pretty radical things, right? I mean,
we have a clip of that.
Okay, so let's go to that.
Yeah, so just to set it up a little bit. I mean, Mertz is an interesting character. He has been in and out of politics for decades. He was in the European Parliament, served in the Bundestag for about 15 years, then left politics in 2009 to go make a shit ton of money in corporate law and business. He and Angela Merkel, the former chancellor, were political rivals, which for a very long time was not a good thing for him because she was like, all-consuming political figure. He describes himself as socially conservative, economically liberal. He's a big supporter of the transatlantic alliance with the U.S., which is what made these election night comments by Mertz so surprising. Here's a clip.
It's clear that the Americans, at least this part of the American government, are largely indifferent to Europe's fate. I am very curious about how we will approach the NATO summit at the end of June. Head towards June. Whether we will still be talking about NATO in its current state, or if we need to establish independent European defense capabilities much more quickly. So that has absolute priority for me. And I have absolutely no illusions about what is happening from America. Look at what Mr. Elon Musk has done recently in terms of interventions in the German elections. That is an unprecedented event. So the interventions from Washington were no less dramatic and drastic and ultimately brazen than the interventions we had from Moscow. Still seen. So we are under such massive pressure from two sides that my absolute priority now truly is to establish unity in Europe.
So, but yeah, in the first term, Trump's first term, I think Europe took kind of like a wait and see approach. I don't know if that's because they were just, biding their time or because, like the Committee to Save America, the Jim Mattises of the world were kind of whispering reassurances to them at the sidelines of the conference. Now they are just moving on. Yeah.
Well, I thought that was an absolutely astonishing, albeit maybe not surprising statement from him. First of all, this is a right-wing guy. I mean, right-wing for the CDU. And this is not a guy that seems enthusiastic about Elon Musk.
No.
Side note, I hate that this guy who's a white South African guy is like the American that everybody's talking about. But put that aside.
Well, did you see Tesla's down 8% today because they had really weak sales in Europe, in part because of this bullshit.
Yeah, of course. But this is not a victory for Trump, right? Trump's party there is the AfD. The Republican Party's sister party in Germany is the AfD. Let's be clear about that. So it's interesting to me that even a kind of right-wing, center-right politician in Europe is like, stay the fuck out. I mean, to compare Elon Musk to Russia interfering in German politics is a pretty powerful statement. And I think what this suggests is there is going to be a rapid realignment in Europe. Now, how that plays out, we don't know. But he was indicating essentially that Europe needs its own defense capabilities, but in a meaningful way. He was talking almost about like nuclear issues that, Germany is obviously not a nuclear weapons power, but Britain and France are. Maybe some collective security arrangement could be made where they're not relying on the American nuclear security umbrella.
Yeah, that's become a big conversation.
That's a huge conversation, and it would totally change geopolitics if essentially Europe says, we are not going to depend on the United States to be our security guarantee. We're going to be our own security guarantee. That's going to ultimately mean that not only do they have a stronger defense capability, and they're talking about plussing up defense spending across the continent, but they're going to have their own views on geopolitics, on whether it's Ukraine, but it could be other issues as well. And so I think you should take Mertz's signal as, hey, I'm actually not going to get into bed with these AfD guys. I want to pull together a German center, albeit in the rightward direction, that is also part of a European response to Trump and Putin, and have a kind of a third way here in Europe, which is a pretty rational thing, but it's an indication of how fast the tectonic plates are moving underneath the globe.
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest, challenge, obviously, the biggest challenge for Merz going forward is going to be economic growth. Germany's kind of stagnated over the last several years. People are pissed. Energy costs went up in part because of the Russian invasion. They also have to figure out an immigration policy that can defang the AfD in the right wing and make people feel heard without emulating them, or, as you said earlier, alienating parts of the Social Democratic coalition in a way that fractures the government. And like, coalition governments are great insofar as they force you to work together with other parties, and they force sort of a more moderate government. But that clearly has allowed these populist movements to thrive and grow on both sides. So we'll see if they can sort of, deal with that and mitigate that risk. I'm a little worried with Merz because he hasn't seemed to be the most deft political operator so far. Like, this move in the Bundestag with the immigration proposal that got the AfD support that was seen as breaking the firewall was very stupid and seemingly led to the rise of this far left party.
Yeah, and his vote share seemed to suffer because of it.
Yeah, definitely. But look, we're not seeing a CDU AfD government. So that's nice.
No, that is nice. And I mean, I think the challenge in immigration, again, is it's not that, the Social Democrats are super pro-immigration these days. There's very little of that in Germany. It's whether or not immigration policy can remain consistent with EU law, essentially. I think that's a tricky thing he has to manage. And also, you talked about growth. Like, guess what's helpful to growth? Immigration, So if you just totally shut the doors, you have aging populations in Europe, how are you going to get growth? One thing we do know, though, is we've got, barring something strange happening, the Trump term, you're going to have Merz in Germany, you're going to have Starmer in the UK because his mandate runs that far. You're going to have Macron for the next, 2 years. And so we kind of know the players. Actually, hopefully we'll have a Democratic House at least by the time Macron's gone. So you kind of know, okay, it's Merz, Starmer, Macron. That's not bad lineup. It's and it runs the gamut from center left to center right, and Macron, uber centrist. So that's what we're dealing with, and obviously Meloni and plenty of other leaders will be heard from as well. Yeah,
decent leaders. I just keep seeing in these elections that the youngest people are just saying absolutely not to the established parties, like 18 to 24-year-olds, or the share of 18 to 24-year-olds voting from the AfD skyrocketed. The share of 18 to 24-year-olds voting for the far left parties skyrocketed. So there's just not a lot of faith in institutions and traditional parties. And look, I'm not mocking. I kind of get it, right? I mean, imagine you're 18, you just went through COVID and this horrible economic crisis and inflation. Things are pretty awful, but we'll see. It's a tough political challenge for me.
No, I think the lesson for the center left to the left is how do you put yourself back on the side of younger people. It's the same thing we're dealing with in this country. And it's not some shortcut like we need a German Joe Rogan or something. You need new messages, new leaders, new media strategies. They're in the same boat as we all are.
Yeah, the young leader in the Dalinka Left Party, she blew up on TikTok.
Yeah.
That's how they reached a lot of people.
And she's super compelling and cool tats,
Yeah, for sure. Pod Save the World is brought to you by Sundays. Sundays is a fresh dog food made from a short list of human-grade ingredients. Sundays was co-founded by Dr. Tori Waxman, a practicing veterinarian who tests and formulates every version of each recipe. Sundays contains 90% meat, 10% superfoods, and 0% synthetic nutrients or artificial ingredients. Dog parents report noticeable health improvements in their pups, including softer fur, fresher breath, better poops, and more energy after switching to Sundays. Here's how I've known for years that Luca, my dog, loves Sundays. John Favreau, you guys might have heard of him. He and Emily feed their dog. All right, Ben, let's turn to our growing autocracy here in the U.S. So Trump's still building out his national security team. We've talked about Kash Patel, Trump's nominee to lead the FBI. He was confirmed 51-49 by the Senate. Only Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski could find the courage to vote against someone who's just clearly not qualified. Patel, he, in addition to just not having the resume you need to run the FBI, he's a January 6th truther. Suggests that the FBI actually planned and incited January 6th. He's been accused of lying and gross incompetence in past government jobs. We could go on forever about him. But for that reason, his lack of experience, that is, Patel was expected to choose a career FBI agent to be his deputy. In fact, that role is always filled by a career person, someone who understands how the building works, that brings institutional memory and operational know-how to the job. According to the Wall Street Journal, Kash Patel promised U.S. senators that he would name a career agent to be his deputy. So, of course, that did not happen. Instead, the new deputy FBI director is a guy named Dan Bongino, and he will not have to be Senate confirmed. Dan was a New York City cop turned Secret Service agent who then quit and unsuccessfully ran for office a bunch of times. He then pivoted to media, hosting a show on Fox News, and then a very successful podcast that was primarily about how great Donald Trump is.
And how awful people like you and me are.
Hates us. Dan actively hates our guts.
Yeah.
And anyone who came across Dan Bongino on Twitter knows that he has like a crazy temper. Calls people commies and motherfuckers and this and that. In addition to, sort of these temperamental challenges, let's say, Ben, this is a clip of how he talks about the FBI on his show. This one's from 2022.
The FBI is lost. It's broken, irredeemably corrupt at this point. The inexcusable raid on President Trump's home was the straw that broke the camel's back. I mean it when I say it. It's way past time to clean this FBI house up. They have burned every last shred of faith and trust freedom-loving Americans had in it. And to the libs out there, listen, don't even waste your time lecturing me on this issue. Not a second. I gaff you right off. I pay no attention to you losers, okay? No one's been a stauncher defender of FBI agents I work with than me. Go back and listen to my shows, you dipwads. I was the one defending them all the time. I've actually been a federal agent and a cop who actually put my butt on the line. But what the FBI did to Donald Trump, that wasn't law enforcement. It was tyranny.
So this one is so bad that you almost have to laugh, but it also seems like a genuine inflection point.
Yeah.
Where, not only are we learning, competence is just not a factor in these selections. It is 100% about political loyalty. And when you play that out as to what it could mean in a crisis or with just a leader of bad faith like Donald Trump, it's pretty scary.
Yes, it is, Tommy. I have my Pod Save the World mug full of Diet Coke here. We may need a second Pod Save the World in Trump years that is after hours with
I'm in.
Stronger stuff. Because listeners of this podcast, worldos out there, know we were pretty on the nose on some of these people. We've been monitoring the Kash Patel situation for years. I did not have this one gamed out.
This is a real wild card for me too, man. I did not think Dan Bongino. I thought maybe he'd get access to Trump. As deputy director of the FBI, it's a wild development. And he was floated for Secret Service head, and that I was like, that freaks me out. But I was like, okay, at least he's done the job.
It's a job. It's not like but yes. And because first of all, you made this comment in our text thread and also on PSA, but this is a pretty rapid. I don't know what else an American slide to autocracy would look like other than what we've seen. And if you look across the board, Patel, Bongino, Pam Bondi, Pete Hegseth, Tulsi Gabbard, this is what it looks like. This is a bunch of total loyalists, including some unhinged personalities in the most powerful positions in government. And just to get a little deeper into this deputy director of the FBI role, this person is basically in charge of managing, not just kind of the vast enterprise of the FBI, incredibly sensitive investigations,
like operational detail.
Yeah, like approving very sensitive law enforcement decisions, to go after certain targets or to not go after other targets. This person negotiates agreements. When I would interface with the deputy director of the FBI, I was often
Sean Joyce. Was the best.
Yeah,
greatest Boston accent you've ever heard.
And by the way, going on a limb. Not a Democrat.
Not a Democrat.
I don't want to put words in his mouth, but these are not.
No doubt in my mind.
Again, repeating the refrain, like the FBI, this idea that the libs love the FBI, that like wiretapped Martin Luther King, and
wild.
this is crazy, right? And so he's going to be involved in negotiations with foreign governments. We talked on this program about like the deputies committee meeting. That's like the situation room meetings on sensitive matters. The deputy FBI director would be there if it was a kind of counterterrorism issue, if it was anything with an international dimension. So this is not a job where, I don't know, he can like be a public figure. This is a management job. And management, not just of like a bunch of thousands of FBI agents, and it's sensitive investigations, it's foreign governments, it's the interagency process of the United States government. I don't even know what it looks like to have Dan Bongino in those rooms.
Literally no experience.
What does it look like? Can you imagine him rolling up in the Situation Room or flying to a foreign country to negotiate an information sharing agreement, or deciding whether or not to authorize going after a law enforcement target? Like, this is
and
not
like
good.
Dan Bongino is definitely 100% one of those guys who would attack me, who would call me a van driver and say, therefore, I wasn't qualified.
Oh, he called me a fiction writer.
Right.
We weren't fiction writer, van driver.
We weren't qualified to be like a spokesman or a speechwriter in the administration
Yeah.
because, I don't know, we hadn't worked in the government for 30 years. And now this guy is coming out of the podcast studio to be deputy director of the FBI. I'm going to read you a quote, Ben. This is a quote. Someone with no background as an agent would never be able to command the respect necessary to run the day-to-day operations of the Bureau. That is from Bill Barr, Trump's attorney general at the end of his first term, talking about Kash Patel.
Yeah.
Because remember, Trump tried to install Kash Patel as the deputy director of the FBI.
And Barr said
and
no
Bill
way.
Barr was like, over my dead fucking body.
Yeah.
And now we've got Dan Bongino.
It also it just suggests because this, I don't know if this was Kash Patel's idea or Donald Trump's idea, but Pam Bondi clearly doesn't care, right? She's, and that Kash Patel, he works for Donald Trump, and if Donald Trump thought it was a cool idea to put Dan Bongino in this job, like, he has to say yes. Like, there is no scenario in which Kash Patel is going to say to Donald Trump, no, I can't do that for you.
About anything.
Which every other FBI, I can tell you, in the Obama years, it was largely Bob Mueller, and then it was, God help us, Jim Comey. Like, they didn't take direction from Barack Obama.
I don't think he ever talked to them.
I remember one time, and I don't know the exact circumstance, but I'm going to guess it was either like the Boston Marathon bombing, or it was like the printing cartridge.
Mm-hmm.
The Al Qaeda tried to put a bomb in a printing cartridge,
Yep.
and Obama suggested to me, like, we needed someone to like talk about this on television, and maybe could I ask if Bob Mueller or whoever the FBI director is. I was like, I think I raised it delicately, like, hey, would the director be? And the fact of the White House even broaching anything, it's as anodyne as a television interview. You would have thought I had just torn a copy of the Constitution or something, right?
How dare you?
Meanwhile, these guys are like, if Donald Trump wants somebody investigated, they're going to be investigated. If Donald Trump wants somebody harassed, they're going to be harassed. And as we've talked about before, even if they don't have the goods to put someone in prison, they can ruin somebody's lives with legal fees. They can, cripple like a business. They can also look the other way at massive amounts of corruption by what they choose not to investigate.
Yeah, they can look the other way, and if they look hard enough at you, they're going to find something that they can prosecute you on.
Yeah.
And look, this comes also as we saw a purge at the Pentagon last week that gets us into similar territory. So Trump fired C.Q. Brown, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. He also fired the head of the Navy, the number 2 at the Air Force, and the top lawyers of the Army, Navy, and Air Force. So C.Q. Brown the now former chairman of the Joint Chiefs, was only the second black chairman in history. He was fired because he is black. Let's just say what happened here. Pete Hegseth made clear in his book that he questioned whether Brown had only been promoted in the first place because of his race. He later did a podcast interview where he accused, he said anyone involved in, quote, DEI woke shit has to be fired. And again, in the case of CQ Brown, the quote unquote DEI woke shit was CQ Brown talking about being a black man in America after George Floyd was killed. That was what happened. The former chief of Navy operations, Lisa Franchetti, who was fired, she was the first woman to hold the job. So, of course, she got the axe. And then the new chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Ben, is going to be Lieutenant General Dan Kane. He is a now retired Air Force pilot that Trump always talks about meeting in Iraq. The apocryphal tale is that Raisin Kane said to him that he could defeat ISIS in a week when all his other advisors said he would take 2 years to defeat them, and Raisin Kane was right. But Kane doesn't actually meet the statutory story requirements for the job because he's a 3-star, not a 4-star, but Trump can give him a waiver. So, Ben, I don't know anything about Dan Kane, and I'm not trying to denigrate his, maybe he's a brilliant military mind, but what you're seeing at DOD feels similar to the FBI insofar as you have a Secretary of Defense who is not remotely qualified for the job, right? He was a Fox News weekend anchor. He now owes all of his loyalty for his entire career is owed to Trump. You have a chairman who was retired in working in venture capital and now has been brought back to be the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, and he would not have gotten that job if not for some sort of conversation where there was a perceived loyalty to Trump. If you listen to Trump tell the story about meeting Raisin Kane in Iraq, he put on a MAGA hat afterwards. And it's all these people that they have no independent kind of resume or power structure or reason to be there except for Donald Trump. And that's just not always the case. Mike Mullen, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, in the beginning of Obama's first term, was a holdover from Bush. Often these are people that get held over through administrations because you want some continuity. Do you want to make the case that the military is apolitical? But that has just been obliterated, and now they're all just loyal to Trump.
Yeah, I mean, I think first of all, we should talk about what happened to CQ Brown. And let's just say the Republican Party has tried to dine out on paeans to the U.S. military for my entire life in politics, and they're completely full of shit. Because if you refuse to stand up for CQ Brown, you are refusing to stand up for the U.S. military and how it operates. And the idea that just because he is black and happens to have spoken eloquently about it once in a video disqualifies him from serving is an insult to every member of the U.S. military. Obviously, it's principally an insult to the many, many, many black and brown enlisted people that fight in this nation's wars, that carry out dangerous missions that people like Donald Trump and would never go on, right? But spare me the tributes and the platitudes and the pablum about the U.S. military if you're willing to run a bus over CQ Brown on behalf of Pete Hegseth and Donald Trump and their so-called anti-woke agenda. Just sit out the next, fucking Veterans and Memorial Day speeches about the U.S. military, because you just insulted every member of the United States military, not just the black and brown people, the white people that serve alongside them. How are you going to have cohesion? Pete Hegseth may like to say diversity is not a strength. How are you going to have cohesion in the force when you're just sending a message that some people are less valuable than other people in the military?
Yeah, if you're black or you're a woman, you're out.
Guess what? When you're in the fucking foxhole or whatever metaphor you want to use, it doesn't really matter what color you are. And you need to care as much about the person next to you, whether they're a woman or whether they're black or whether they're brown or whatever the hell they are, So I wish there had been more outrage about this.
I know.
Because this is not normal.
Just kind of happened on a Friday night.
This never happens. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs always rolls over. It's not like you come in and you pick your own person. It's this worrisome thing. The FBI is worrisome enough. I mean, they've focused on the most powerful parts of government, law enforcement and violence, the military. This is the most powerful institution in the world, the United States military. It is 3 million people. And to just turn it over and to try to turn it into some MAGA militia, governed by Pete Hegseth is really dangerous and something that people have to watch closely. I do think on the Dan Kane piece of this, do you remember when Trump insisted on calling Jim Mattis Mad Dog.
And he's like, that's not my name. He's like, I don't like that.
Mattis is like, I don't like that.
Yeah.
I don't know if Dan Cain likes to go by Raisin Cain. Trump's got this weird thing, like he wants a general with a nickname and kind of central casting, So we'll see. But what worries me the most about this is Pete Hegseth, actually, is just that this is the guy that's really in charge. And, I don't know. I hope that the military can be insulated by some degree from political interference. We'll have to see.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. Pete Hegseth is a clown. He shouldn't have the job. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs is supposed to be the principal military advisor to the president. I mean, you would think you would want the most experienced person you could possibly find in that job. Therefore, you would want them to be a 4-star, maybe a combatant commander, or someone who was a service chief. Dan Cain is not that. He also has sort of a weird resume. Like, he retired as a 3-star, but he did this liaison job to the CIA that was sort of confusing. It was just like an odd resume, really.
It's an odd resume. I mean, what I found interesting about it, though, is like for the last several years, he worked for our man, Bill Burns, so like, not exactly, so it's confusing. It's the kind of resume that, like, I had a couple of people that worked for me, Tommy, in our, little unit of the NSC, right? I remember there was one guy that, it was after you left, he came to work on kind of some of that global information space. And he had like a 15-year gap in his resume. It was like, he signed up to serve, and at the end, and then like the next year before, like, point being is that he was up to some, special forces type stuff, I'm sure. And there's a little bit of that in the Dan Cain resume,
Which you could look.
Which you could argue is interesting, but we don't know what was, what it was.
That's exactly right. Like, you could argue on the merits if the process wasn't so weird. You could argue that a hybrid kind of military, like CIA background, actually is kind of an accurate reflection of the way the U.S. does, military operations around the world these days. But it just happens in such a fucked up, strange, hackish way that I don't trust it.
Well, and here's the other thing. The reason they have those requirements about being a 4-star is that they want you to have been like a service chief. Like, usually the Joint Chiefs had run the Air Force, the Navy, the Army, because it's not just military advisor on like policy. It's also like managing the workforce, managing all these personnel, knowing how procurement is working, right? And so that's what's missing from Dan Cain's resume is being in this position of kind of overseeing an entire force, and so but that may be because Pete Hegseth thinks that his like woke books or anti-woke books qualify him. There's actually nobody that means that has experience, like managing this huge enterprise of millions of people.
Right. No, CQ Brown did. He was an Air Force service chief. He was deputy CENTCOM, and now he's gone. Yeah. Because he gave a speech once about being black in America for 5 minutes.
By the way, everybody should watch that speech.
It's very good.
Yeah.
It's really powerful. All right, Ben, we also wanted to check in on, there's this like flurry of immigration news happening every day. And trying to follow it beyond just the day's headlines, I think, is important. So last week, we saw these reports. There were 170 Venezuelan migrants flown from Guantanamo to Venezuela. The Washington Post had a story documenting the horrific conditions on the ground at this Gitmo camp that we've talked about in the past, where the Trump people say they're going to house up to 30,000 migrants. The conditions we're talking about include solitary confinement, people getting strip searched, people being shackled and caged when they're allowed outside. And despite the administration's claim that everyone getting sent to Gitmo were the worst of the worst, they're violent criminals, they're gang members, they're murderers, that's just not true. CNN reported that 51 of the 177 had no criminal record at all. And then separately, the New York Times had this devastating piece, and the Daily did a version of it that's worth listening to, about a bunch of migrants that had been deported from the U.S. and were sent to Panama. These were people from all around the world. There was a guy from China. There was a person from Iran who had converted to Christianity. Many of them were asylum seekers, and they were all just shipped to Panama. And then they got locked in these hotel rooms. They didn't know what was going on. They couldn't contact anyone. There was people killing themselves, like absolutely awful. And basically what happened was they were offered some sort of opportunity to get repatriated to their home country or their country of origin. For many, that is an impossibility because they would be killed or put in prison. And so when they refused, they were sent to this squalid camp by the edge of the jungle near the Darien Gap. And so, Ben, I'm sure what's happening, the optics of it, some of the reporting, I bet it is having a deterrent effect. There are probably people who are like, oh my God, this is like inhuman. I don't want to go to the U.S. now. But more importantly, I think, for us is that it's highlighting how difficult this mass deportation effort is going to be, because if the government knew where all the worst of the worst violent, undocumented offenders were, they would already have been sent home. But they don't, right? So what's happening is they're deporting fewer people than Trump wants. He's going to start pushing them to do more. They're picking up the wrong people, innocent people often, and they're doing it in like horrible conditions. And I think tracking this is going to be pretty important, because it's illegal in some cases, inhumane in every case, and just worth flagging.
Yeah, loath to recommend another podcast. It's not Dan Bongino, but the daily episode on this is really powerful. And, you make a few important points. First is, it's hard to, some countries won't take deportees back, right? So, there are countries, like Nicaragua or other countries in Central America that aren't exactly like lining up to take back people who've been deported. What's so powerful about that segment, though, it's people from China. This woman from Iran is a Christian, and that's why she doesn't want to go back. By the way, what a bunch of hypocrites.
Where's Mike Pence?
Yeah, where's the evangelical Christians in the Republican Party that want to stand up for people like that? There's a human tragedy of just these people being deposited in the middle of nowhere in Panama. We talked on this podcast several times about the Tory government wanting this scheme to send people back to Rwanda. This is much, much, much worse. Like, as grotesque as that Rwanda plan was, it was actually a plan. It was like, sending them there, and there's like seems like they're just like dumping people off of planes in Panama, and Panama's so scared to say no because Trump might take the Panama Canal back. But there's something more fundamental about this. This is not, if you look at who these people are, this is not like people, coming across the southern border. Some of these people are people who have very credible cases for political asylum, like a Iranian Christian who's worried that she's going to be killed or imprisoned for her religion. Through all our ups and downs with immigration, one thing that's been pretty constant, the U.S. has been a safe haven for people who have very credible fears of being killed or imprisoned for their political or religious beliefs. We are changing something fundamental about our identity as a country if those are the kinds of people that we're sending to the jungle in Panama.
Yeah.
This is, again, not securing the border. This is saying no to dissidents, to political asylum seekers with very, very credible claims. And we are no longer that country that, has been so beyond enriched. This is how we got people like Einstein to come here, like by having people that had different political or religious views from the places that they're from. And I think we have to track this too. Like, how are we changing as to who we are? And it's certainly going to change attitudes towards the United States. And those people are going to look to other places to go if they can find other places to go. And we're going to lose a lot as a country in the long run for it.
Did you see that Eric Prince, the former head of Blackwater, which, if you guys don't know, is a private militia force that was accused of all kinds of atrocities in Iraq, he has reportedly pitched the Trump administration on a $25 billion plan to create a vigilante army to deport 12 million people before the midterm. So it could get worse.
Well, this is to go back to our banter about Nazi reading. I mean, one thing that's been missing is, Hitler came to power in part with the support of the SA, these brown shirts, tens of thousands of Germans that terrorized his political opponents, be they communists or Jews or trade unionists. That's the one thing we didn't have yet. I mean, we did have Proud Boys and some kind of militia guys. If we literally, I'm not exaggerating. I mean, Eric Prince's proposal is essentially creating some brown shirts, people roaming around American communities, vigilantes, empowered to seize people. Do you really trust those guys to separate violent criminals from other people, or frankly separate someone who looks different, who is a citizen of this country,
especially
from
if there's
somebody
a profit motive?
Yeah.
No, not at all.
If they have quotas, I mean, it's the same, you don't like it when people have quotas get parking tickets. If these guys have quotas to deport people, it's not going to be good.
Yeah. Terrible. Okay, we have a few more things to get through before we get to the interview. So the annual Conservative Political Action Conference, or CPAC conference, just wrapped up. This thing used to be like kind of a right-wing fringe that we would all make fun of every year. Now it's just
runs
the MAGA base. Yeah. Over the years, CPAC has evolved to include more international speakers. They even hold conferences abroad. Here's a quick supercut of some of the international voices at this year's CPAC.
Suddenly, post-November the 5th, America is optimistic. It's upbeat. It's the beginning of the golden age in America.
Ladies and gentlemen, we missed the first American Revolution in 1776.
Get out.
In fact, it was
Gross,
actually a
British.
revolution against us.
Icky.
But we want to be
True.
part of the second American Revolution.
I envy so much your program,
That's
Drill
such a
Baby
weird thing for a
Drill.
British person to say. To
We'll look for one in Europe. MAGA and
the
MEGA.
Polish guy can stay, even though
These
I don't like him
movements,
either.
these movements are not only simply slogans. They represent a vision that resonates urgently not only in the United States, but across the world.
When Bill Clinton and Tony Blair created the global leftist liberal network in the 90s,
My wife. We were watching the, right before I took Zapata to the vet, we were watching the James Kerr Lindsay, and the one guy was like, no European leader can stand up to Trump and be serious. And I'm like, Meloni could, but she won't, because she, if it meant that standing up to him to stay in NATO and playing hardball with him, she would fucking floor him, and it would be emasculating because she's a woman. I love that we got the Trump combat knife. This is not a combat knife, by the way.
they were called statesmen. Today, when Trump, Meloni, Milei, or maybe Modi talk, they are called a threat to democracy.
Viva la libertad, carajo!
Shout out to Michael and our team for enduring all those speeches and cutting them down for you.
I think Michael secretly is entertained.
He loved it. Yeah, he's laughing over there. That was Forum UK's Nigel Farage, former Tory Prime Minister Liz Truss. Who, gosh, she's such a dud every time I hear her talk. The former Prime Minister of Poland, whose name I'm not going to try. Slovakian Prime Minister Robert Fico, Italy's Giorgia Meloni, and Argentina's Javier Milei at the end there, entertaining us. Not in those clips, but attending were Jair Bolsonaro's son, the former president of Brazil, and the leader of the far-right Spanish Vox party. Milei not only gave a speech, he hung out with Elon Musk, handed him a chainsaw.
Yeah.
I always remember his thing at all these campaign events. And then a weird kind of stoned-seeming Elon Musk hung out with the chainsaw and wore glasses and tried to make
I think
jokes
it's advisable to not be on ketamine while you're operating
man,
a chainsaw.
The whole thing was off. Notably absent from the proceedings was Jordan Bardella, who's the leader of Marine Le Pen's far-right National Rally Party. He canceled his appearance after Steve Bannon gave what I think everyone with eyeballs thought looked like a Nazi salute. Bannon denied it, said it was a wave. Clearly he's trying to do the I'm just trolling thing. And he had this to say to a French
Alexander's mom calls him the most perfect boy in the world.
He's right.
I love your confidence. When diagnosed with Alexander's mom calls him the most perfect boy in the world.
He's right.
I love your confidence. When diagnosed with Alexander's mom calls him the most perfect boy in the world.
He's right.
I love your confidence. When diagnosed with Alexander's mom calls him the most perfect
publication, quote, if he, Bardella, canceled the speech over what the mainstream media said about the speech, he didn't listen to the speech. If that's true, he's unworthy to lead France. He's a boy, not a man. Okay, Steve, some tough talk. I don't know, Ben, what do you make of this collection of goobers who spoke and what it tells us? It's a lot of this usual suspects.
It's the usual suspects. Part of what's so frustrating about this political moment is, on the one hand, I have to acknowledge the very effective 10-year effort to construct this far-right international that they built. And there needs to be one on the center-left to the left. There needs to be our version of CPAC. We've needed it for a long time.
Oh my God.
I wrote a whole book about this global international.
Stand this shit.
But at the same time that I can see how they've been investing in shared platforms like this, shared political strategies, shared funding sources, most of them are so fucking mediocre.
I know
that it drives me crazy. So I can see what's really smart about what they've done, and yet you've got a bunch of goobers like Liz Truss and Milei screaming at the top of his lungs. I will say Meloni's an astute politician,
she's done well for herself.
That was actually the smartest clip. Hey, why can't we be? Bill Clinton, Tony Blair started global progress. By the way, I go to global progress summits. Like they're not quite what the energy is in that room.
No.
You know, like maybe we need some chainsaws at the global progress summits. But as much as we should laugh at this because there's an absurdity to it, more importantly, we have to reverse engineer it and have our own.
I agree. Let's end this by talking about some news out of Gaza and the West Bank. So in terms of Gaza, Ben, last week we talked about this horrible, tragic news about the Bibas family. Yarden Bibas, the patriarch of the family, was returned in one of the recent hostage release deals. He was one of the men who looked like a Holocaust survivor because he was so emaciated. But, we officially learned around the same time that his wife and 2 small children had died while in Hamas captivity. Last week, Hamas was supposed to release the bodies of Shiri Bibas, Yarden's wife, and their 2 children, 4-year-old Ariel and 9-month-old Kafir. But the Israeli authorities later determined that the body Hamas said was Shiri Bibas was someone else. Hamas said there was a mix-up of some sort. They later returned the correct body. But it is hard to imagine anything more cruel and evil in just its totality than the treatment of the Bibas family, from kidnapping them in the first place to kidnapping children, to starving Yarden Bibas to the point where he looked so emaciated, to parading the coffins these children were in through the streets of Gaza and then returning the wrong bird. Like, the words don't do justice for how fucking evil this was. An Israeli military spokesman later said that the Bibas boys were killed with bare hands, quote unquote. Hamas had claimed that the Bibas family was killed in an airstrike. I don't know that we can prove either of those things. I just want to say that, it's really awkward to talk about this because my view on this is I don't need to know how the Bibas children died to know that it was evil and wrong to kidnap children in the first place. Like, obviously, if they were strangled to death by a Hamas person, that is like a next level thing. But like the fact that they were taken is just beyond cruel. But I want to reflect in our conversation that there is debate and dispute over sort of what the forensic pathologists could know at this point. But all of that tension brings us to Saturday, when Hamas handed over the last living hostages that were part of this phase 1 of the ceasefire deal. Israel was supposed to release 620 Palestinian prisoners, but they put their release on hold in protest of the treatment of the Bibas family and these hostages. Hamas also released this awful propaganda video of 2 hostages who were not set for release until phase 2, but they were brought to this ceremony and forced to watch others go free, and then they were begging for their freedom. So again, just unfathomable cruelty. Hamas accused Israel of a blatant violation of the agreement for not releasing these 620 prisoners and said there'd be no more ceasefire talks until they were let go. A Hamas official accused Netanyahu of intentionally sabotaging the ceasefire efforts. So phase 1 of the ceasefire ends on Saturday. The talks for the second phase haven't even started. When asked about the ceasefire failing and the war beginning again, Trump told Fox's Brian Kilmeade that he was basically okay with it going either way. So Ben, I just wonder where you're at on your hope for this thing extending. I've heard reports that Israeli authorities want to extend phase 1 rather than negotiate to phase 2, which it doesn't give me much confidence that the war is going to stay over. But I don't know where you're at on this.
They seem to not want to get to the more foundational issues, about the future of Gaza, where there's just these bigger gaps. They've been better at being able to negotiate essentially prisoner exchanges, because that's where we are now. There's a ceasefire and then these prisoner exchanges, Palestinians released and then hostages returned. That's better than the alternative of kind of return to where we were before. But it does suggest that they can't really deal with these long-term questions. And so they may just try to get as many exchanges done without while kicking the can.
Without withdrawing fully.
I will say, this is a window into the fact that, the current iteration of Hamas remains completely kind of nihilistic and lacking in any capacity for empathy, in not just in what was done to the Bibas family, but the way in which they managed all this. I will also say, Tommy, seeing the valuation of human life in the Israeli response to the treatment of this family. What about the tens of thousands of Palestinian children who've been killed? It's something kind of I just wish you could extend.
Gotta do both.
Yeah, you
gotta do both.
I wish there could be empathy in both directions
That's right.
for children and civilians. The only other things I'd flag we have to come back to in more time. The West Bank,
I know you're hearing that, Echo.
is
I'm trying
like
to
looks like
fucking-
Israel's ratcheting up there, but also Syria. Like Israel's doing a lot of shit in southern Syria.
Well, just to get a little more deep meat on that, I mean, Israeli tanks have entered the West Bank for the first time in over 2 decades. This is this huge operation in Jenin that has displaced about 40,000 people.
Yeah, this is not small.
Yeah, so it's the biggest displacement in the West Bank since the 1967 war. And Netanyahu was saying the IDF is going to stay there as long as it's needed. And so further stoking the flames is there was this attack. There was like 3 buses blew up in Tel Aviv. Yeah. No one died, thank God, but one of the unexploded bombs had a message on it that talked about revenge for a raid in the West Bank. And then to your point, I mean, this demand, the Netanyahu was demanding the demilitarization of southern Syria. There's a question about like whether the new Syrian army is welcome in this territory south of Damascus. So there's a lot, as you mentioned, like there's a lot up in the air here.
And and we should spend more time on the Syria thing when we have more time, but like this is Syrian territory. It's like, why is the Israeli and nobody, the Syrian government, the new Syrian government has not said anything threatening Israel. They've actually said they don't honor all these agreements. I don't think anybody thinks that the Syrian military is like preparing to roll into Israel. In fact, these are the people, yes, they're Islamists, but I thought we didn't like Assad. I thought he was part of the axis of resistance. And the one thing I'd say just globally to bring this home is this is what I'm worried about with Trump, is that the complete normalization, of borders don't matter, annexations don't matter.
Ceasefire doesn't matter.
Like ceasefires don't matter. It's going to encourage the more, maximalist impulses of everybody. In this case, the Israeli government in West Bank and Syria, Hamas, in their nihilism and radicalism, which may grow, and everybody else around the world. This is what a world with no rules might look like.
Yeah. I should mention, since we started recording and now it seems like everyone's reporting that the minerals deal has been agreed to, and Zelensky's going to come to the White House on Friday to sign it. So we'll see.
We'll see what's actually in that deal.
Yeah, finally. Okay, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, you're going to hear my interview with Zeke Fox about crypto scams, crypto corruption.
I don't care.
Microphone. Hello. You hear me now? It's very loud here. They're putting solar on the roof.
I can't hear you.
Why?
Too quiet.
I've literally changed nothing.
I can't hear you at all.
Turn your sound up. Can you hear them putting solar on my roof?
I can't. I can just hear. It sounds like you're in the other room.
Okay, well, the Twitch, my audio is fine on the Twitch, so it's a you problem. Yeah, that's a problem on your end. Yeah, that's going to continue happening for a while. So I might just like chill here and just not participate because it's
whatever you're
loud.
saying. I don't know.
Everyone else can hear me.
Convicted felon Donald Trump gave a psychotic press conference yesterday in the Oval Office where he turned it into a flea market where he is schlepping his riffraff and knickknacks from the Resolute desk. And we have triple Trumper MAGA voters crying MAGA tears because they are just so shocked that they're getting fired from their jobs. And then, of course, we have the MAGA Congress that has cut $2 trillion in services and research for Americans, most of which are in need of this. And get a load of what they did immediately after passing this immoral, heartless, diabolical budget. Play the
This
clip.
time I ask the House to observe a moment of silence.
Members, staff, guests, please rise for a moment of silence.
All right, as you can see, as a person who grew up in the Bible Belt, I have found that this is the essence of evangelical Christianity and MAGA Christianity, where they do a lot of bad things or horrible, horrible things happen, and then just have a quick attaboy prayer, and then they move on. So it's the thoughts and prayer, performative religiosity on the House floor after they cut healthcare, medical care from the poorest Americans. Explain to me, like I'm 5 years old, how these people are big Christians.
Having grown up in the evangelical faith, I can tell you that there is a level of entitlement and narcissism, and that because you are an evangelical Christian, you are
I
higher.
was listening to the Labimbos before I took Zapata to the bat, and they were like just being based as fuck.
Superior elite compared to others, and that you are able to judge others because you're special, you're unique.
My mom says I'm
So
special.
I believe that these people do not see their hypocrisy because they believe they are above
Chosen.
other people, and they are chosen, and they are better than other people. So when they hurt other people, it's okay because they're better.
They're in God's favor.
They're in God's favor. And that runs all the way through. The judgment in Christianity is mind-boggling. And this is a perfect example of that.
Next up, we have my spirit animal, my favorite woman in the United States of America.
Spirit animal?
And I'm talking about Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. Play the clip.
You could speak directly to Elon Musk, what would you say? Fuck off!
That's it.
Yes, yes, this is the energy we need. I'm going to tell you something that I have absolutely had it with. I have had it with Democratic politicians and Democratic strategists
call
saying
it
the following
bimbos?
things. These MAGA voters.
Their name is Labimbos.
What is that?
Lib Bimbos.
Oh, awful. You said they were saying base shit? Is that these two?
Yeah, they were earlier when we were listening to them.
Interesting.
They're not actually called Labimbos, Jack. Remember, I had a conversation with you about what we should call them?
Do we? No, I don't remember.
Yes. Their show is called I've Had It.
That's an awful name.
I've had it. I've just about had enough.
Live Bimbos is better.
Yeah, let me. Oh no, that's not exactly what I wanted. I'm just gonna go to my history real quick because it was like towards the end of the video. Bro, I got so sick trying to get Zapata to the vet. I got like car sick because they didn't fill my ADHD medication.
Ah.
And so like I didn't have it for multiple days.
Okay.
And then I took it and tried to drive after like shoveling my driveway and like raising my heart rate. I was literally driving there with a cup on my face, throwing it up into the cup the whole time.
Epic.
And
Fucking hell.
like I'm not like sick still, but my throat is destroyed.
From the
not like
acid.
not like how it's destroyed from when you talk too much though. It's like lower where my Adam's apple is from the muscles contracting.
Yes. Yeah. I get it. How's he doing? Little rat.
I have to give him stuff to
He's alright?
do all the stuff.
He's hanging in there?
Well, we have to do treatments and narrow down what he has.
Okay. So they still don't know.
God, which one is it? I watched a bunch of Libimbos. But then one I put on and I was like, what? They're being based as fuck.
You know me, I love trash. About black football players and black basketball players, entertain.
Yes.
That person is smarter than me regarding the human body. And that person has.
Pete Hegseth fired JAG officers. Well, why did he do that? So on Fox, he was asked the question, why did you fire these JAG attorneys in the DOJ? I'm sorry, in the Department of Justice.
For people who may not know, I mean, they give advice to the military about what is lawful and what isn't. Not surprisingly, there's been some backlash to those who are worried about their removal. One Georgetown law professor says this: Trump also firing the Army, Navy, and Air Force JAGs. In some ways, that's even more chilling than firing the 4 stars. It's what you do when you're planning to break the law. You get rid of any lawyers who might try to slow you down. Your response to her?
I don't know who Rosa is and what her hyperbole is all about. Ultimately, we want lawyers who give sound constitutional advice and don't
the alcoholic who runs the Department of Defense, ex-Fox News host.
Oh, cool. No, I know.
attempt to be roadblocks to anything that happens in their spots. What we know about these TJAGs, they're called TJAGs.
So what he said basically is exactly what the person tweeted that is looking at the Department of Defense. We don't want lawyers to stand up and give roadblocks to what we want to do vis-a-vis. If we want to do things that are illegal, we don't want lawyers that will tell us, you can't do that, it's illegal. I mean, he admitted it on Fox News. It's unbelievable.
I mean, here's how I feel about Pete Hegseth. I think the people surrounding him need to do an intervention, and they need to take him to rehab for his alcoholism. And once he's been sober 4 or 5 years, because I think that's about how long it takes for the brain to fully kind of recover from being in remission from alcohol abuse disorder. I think then we can sit down and interview him. Until then, you have a bunch of broken people running the United States of America. Trump, inner childhood trauma,
I think Alzheimer's is
malignant narcissism, titty baby. Elon Musk, untreated drug addict, huge titty baby, insecure as all get out. Pete Hegseth, titty baby. Mama had to go on a tour for him. He's a grown-ass man.
I like
whose
titties.
mother scolded him rightfully for his behavior. And that letter was leaked to the press. And then she had to go and say, oh, he's better now, blah, blah. These are the most unqualified, broken titty babies. All of them need to go away. They need to go away and work on themselves, because what we have done is we are now showcasing the mental health crisis that has swept the nation by electing the most fucked up people we possibly can, and then letting them appoint even more fucked up people. I don't even mention like Kash Patel, Pam Bondi, or the governor of Kristi Noem, that woman who wears all those costumes all the time. I mean, it would be hilarious if they were just it would be hilarious if they were just running for office. These people are in charge of the United States of America. It is in all of this bullshit from Elon Musk that he saved all this money. This is a lie. It is a bold-faced lie. All he has done is stop investigations into himself and to his companies and cleared the way for his companies to rape and pillage.
Why do you need to turn the power off?
Because they're installing solar.
Oh, okay.
No, Mum, I need internet. It's fine, don't worry.
Yeah, I'll just...
yeah, so you'll just have to solo take it for a couple hours before I...
I'll just stream on OBS.
Okay, that works. I don't know. Yeah, alright. The viewers say hi, Mum.
Okay, you want to finish this now?
Yeah. Finish this.
Village taxpayer dollars more and more and more.
That's exactly right. That's exactly what he's doing. And whenever I think about the people around Trump and the people that advise him, and he and JD Vance, I think it makes the island of misfit toys look like the greatest thing on earth. I mean, these people are bottom feeders. They could no more serve in an Obama administration, even a George Bush administration. I mean, these people are profoundly underqualified, and they want to run around saying DEI hire. This is the most, if you're incompetent, come on over. We got a job for you.
It's like it's a prerequisite. The more screwed up you are, and maybe that's because they're compromised, and maybe that's how Musk and Trump, hang on to them, or maybe they're just all so broken in this alternate universe
Saturday
together.
either, because I got a wedding.
I don't know, but this is embarrassing.
So
if
you
people
might
listen
need
to
to
Pete
take
Hegseth
solo on
and they
Saturday
think,
as well.
yep, he should be in charge, it just reveals, number one, how stupid that person is that would think that. Number two, how broken this country is, that we no longer value facts and putting smart people. For me personally, when I go to a doctor, I take comfort in the fact that that person is smarter than me regarding the human body. And that person has more than a decade, more than 2 decades of schooling and rigorous testing to treat me. As such, I want the people in charge of the government to have experience. And this whole notion that, and there's a lot of Republicans that think this, if somebody's rich, they're smart and successful. And this whole notion in capitalism that everything has to be privatized, you're all going to get screwed. You're all going to get screwed by it because corporations seek one thing and one thing only. Look no further than United Healthcare and all of the people that company has killed by denying, deposing,
They're
defending.
doing the pro Luigi
look
shit.
At all of the deaths there, and they don't care. That's what privatization does for you, and that's what all of these people are setting up. It will only benefit the upper class, and everybody below that is going to get killed, harmed, fucked.
Well, they've convinced people that regulations are not consumer protection, that you shouldn't support regulation, which we will all lose in that fight.
A lot of people
Moving on to something else a little more petty, because I love to be petty. The Philadelphia Eagles were invited to the White House after their Super Bowl win, and they have declined. And so MAGA is madder than a hornet. So we have toxic cowboy posting. The Philadelphia Eagles declined to visit the White House. Wish I had known this before the Super Bowl. I wouldn't have wasted my time rooting for them. Eagles fan, your team
I would have
sucks.
wasted my time rooting
Kelly,
for them is
boy,
one of the
she's
funniest
mad. I mean,
things.
she's just raging all the time. She
amazing.
says, same, go F yourself, Eagles. My husband is a fan, so I got on board, but F this BS.
Shut up,
Why is Megyn Kelly so mad all the time?
I've personally never seen any sort of a rational thought or anything from her. But what I have to say about the Philadelphia Eagles is good for them.
Good for them.
And it's important to point out that Jalen Hurts, the quarterback, when he was asked, what do you think about Donald Trump coming to the Super Bowl? He looked right in the camera and said he can do whatever he wants. He was polite enough about it. But obviously, Jalen Hurts is a black man. He knows what we all see. And we all see all this DEI talk and all of this bullshit from MAGA. We know what their default setting is. We know what white people think about black football players and black basketball players. Entertain me and then shut the fuck up. We know it, and Jalen Hurts knows it. And good for him.
Isn't she
also
great?
Know, Jalen Hurts is managed by an entirely female team. This is what real masculinity is. Propping up marginalized, competent people and not being afraid of somebody that doesn't look like you and is not the same gender of you. This whole notion of these, like Jesse Waters, constantly talking about masculinity. If you're on the defense, constantly having to defend how masculine you are, I have news for you. You're not masculine at all, and it makes us all think you're probably a closet homosexual.
Exactly. And when asked about his all-female management team, Jalen Hurts said, I chose the most qualified people. I didn't go into their race or sex. And I was like, good for him. Okay, one last thing. Trump, shockingly, is grifting from the Oval Office. He is monetizing his Gulf of America t-shirts, Make Greenland Great Again, and he has new black edition with different font, Make America Great Again hats. Like, so the sitting president of the United States.
The thing she said about black people, though, I was like, I've never heard something out of someone her age And I assume she's like
That's
in her
free.
60s. Because of how
Yeah,
much
yeah.
work she's had done, I assume she's 60.
Something like that.
Educate yourselves, worthless bums. And they sent a Marxist. Is that AI? Cool. AI, awesome. Is this an anti-Marxist thing? Because that's funnier, considering the bimbos we have on screen. If they're judging them as Marxist, that's hilarious. I love how he's just frozen because he turned the power off. There he goes. All right, I'm going to switch to OBS real quick. So the stream will drop for a second.